She said, "I can't have children." The vampire king just smiled. "I've got enough for both of us." The kingdom of Alarion had always whispered in half-light, a land where the sun seemed reluctant to linger, and the night cast long silver shadows over the jagged cliffs. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of the castle that crowned the tallest hill, its black spire stretching like frozen fingers into the cloudy sky. They called it the home of King Valor the immortal vampire, whose presence could chill the air and command fear even in the bravest hearts. Lyra moved through the cobbled streets of the village below the castle, her cloak drawn tight against the cold evening wind. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but the weight of her own thoughts pressed heavily against her chest. For years she had felt incomplete, haunted by the knowledge she could not bear children, a cruel irony for the daughter of a noble house. Her family had long whispered their disappointment, their eyes filled with the kind of sorrow that did not need words. She shook her head, attempting to banish the memories. Tonight she was to present herself before the vampire king. No one in the village knew exactly why, and Lyra herself had received only a brief summons, a gilded letter sealed with the black crest of Valor. Her heart raced with both fear and curiosity. The road wound upward through misty hills, each step bringing her closer to the castle. She could feel the air change as she approached, heavier, colder, tinged with a faint metallic scent she could not name. When the gates loomed before her, carved from black iron and etched with symbols older than her memory, Lyra hesitated. Stories of Valor's wrath flickered in her mind. Tales of noblemen who had vanished for a single misstep, of intruders who had entered the castle only to be turned into shadows themselves. Yet beneath the fear, a strange pull drew her forward. A servant, pale and silent, led her through the grand halls. Candles burned in crystal sconces, their flames dancing as if alive. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and celebrations, victories and losses long forgotten. Lyra's fingers itched to touch them, to trace the history woven into their threads, but she resisted. Here, nothing was hers. At last, she was brought before the throne room. The doors opened with a low, resonant groan, and Lyra's breath caught. The chamber was enormous, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness above. Shadows clung to every corner, as though the room itself were alive. At the far end, on a throne carved from obsidian, sat Valor. He did not rise as she entered. His eyes, dark and endless, held her in place, measuring her, understanding more than she dared reveal. He was impossibly tall, and his presence radiated a power that seemed to vibrate through the floor. His hair, black as midnight, fell over broad shoulders, and his skin had the pale sheen of moonlight on still water. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Lyra's pulse quicken, even as a shiver ran down her spine. "Lyra of House Aveline," he said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying a weight that seemed to pull her forward. "You have come willingly. That is unusual." Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. "I came because you summoned me, Your Majesty." Her voice was steady, though her heart raced.
"I do not know why." Valor's smile widened just slightly, as if her honesty pleased him.
"Ah, but you will learn soon enough. The matters of this kingdom are not always clear to those who dwell in the light, and yet you carry a shadow of your own, do you not?" Lyra stiffened. I am not sure I understand." I know," he said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. "I know of the pain that clings to your heart, the emptiness that whispers to you at night, that you cannot have children." Her breath hitched. How could he know? She had never spoken this aloud. Not to her family, not to anyone. Her cheeks warmed with a mixture of fear and shame. Ayla rose from his throne, his movement fluid and silent, and began to walk toward her. Lyra felt the weight of centuries in his steps, the silent history of power and sorrow. When he stopped a mere few feet away, she could feel the pull of his presence as though the air itself bent toward him. "Your condition does not make you weak," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "It does not diminish you. On the contrary, it makes you rare." Lyra opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. She could feel her defenses trembling under the force of his gaze, a strange mixture of danger and warmth swirling within her chest. "I have enough for both of us," he said, his smile returning, cryptic and compelling. "And perhaps in time you will see that absence does not define you." The sound of the castle gates banging open interrupted them. A servant ran through the hall, bowing low, whispering a single word that made Lyra's stomach twist. "Shadow Beast," outside the western wall. Vaylor's expression hardened. Without a word, he swept toward the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Lyra followed, her curiosity overtaking her fear. Below, she saw a creature moving in the fog. A massive shape darker than the night, with eyes like burning coals. Villagers had spoken of such things in whispers, calling them omens, harbingers of death. Vaylor's voice, calm yet commanding, carried to the courtyard. "It shall not harm those who dwell within these walls, but the kingdom cannot survive unless the heart of courage faces the darkness." Lyra's pulse quickened. "And if it comes here, then we face it," he said simply, as if the answer were obvious. They watched in tense silence as the creature circled the castle, its eyes glowing, measuring, waiting. Lyra felt a thrill of fear and excitement mingling in her veins. Somehow Vaylor's presence made the danger seem less terrifying, as though the darkness itself respected him. Later, as she was guided back to her chambers, Lyra could not shake the feeling that Vaylor's words had pierced deeper than any sword or spell. He had seen into her soul, acknowledged her pain without judgment. And though she feared him, a strange trust began to form, a fragile, trembling trust that both frightened and drew her. That night, as the wind howled against the high towers and the shadows deepened, Lyra tried to sleep. The castle was alive with whispers, the faintest rustle of movement in the halls, the distant echo of footsteps she could not place. She wondered what it would be like to belong here, to face the darkness without trembling, to be seen for who she truly was. A soft tap at the window startled her. She sat up, her heart pounding. There, in the moonlight, stood a figure she had only just met, yet whose presence filled her with an impossible mixture of fear and longing. "Lyra." The voice was low, melodic, carrying over the night air. "Do not fear the shadows. They are only as dark as you allow them to be." She froze. His eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, held centuries of knowledge and sorrow. He stepped closer, resting a pale hand against the glass. "You will see soon enough that your absence does not make you weak. It makes you interesting." And then, just as suddenly, he was gone, leaving Lyra alone with the wind and the pounding of her own heart. She lay awake the rest of the night, unable to forget the intensity of his gaze, the strange warmth that had seeped into her chest despite the cold around her. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something new, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and the faintest hope that perhaps in the shadows of Elarian she might find a place where she belonged. The castle slept, or so it seemed. But Lyra knew that in the night, in the spaces between the candles' glow, nothing was ever truly at rest. And somewhere, in the endless dark, Vaylor watched, smiling just enough to make her wonder what the future would demand of her, and whether she would be ready. The morning mist clung to the cliffs around the castle like a soft veil, hiding the edges of the world and leaving only whispers of the lands beyond. Lyra awoke in her chamber, the memory of the night before still heavy in her mind. The Vampire King had watched her from the shadows, his presence lingering in the corners of her thoughts, as if he had left a mark she could not erase. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the strange mixture of fear and fascination he had stirred within her. Her day began with the usual courtly routine. Servants arrived with messages, noble advisors murmured their concerns, and Lyra tried to keep her mind steady. Yet no matter how much she focused, her thoughts kept returning to Vaylor. There was something dangerous in him, something that could devour a person whole, but also something unexpectedly gentle. He had seen her pain, the loss she carried silently for years, and had not recoiled. Instead, he had smiled in a way that suggested he understood it better than anyone else ever could. It was mid-morning when she was summoned to the throne room again. Valor awaited her, standing in the center of the vast chamber as though he had been there all along, though she had sworn she had not seen him enter. His eyes, dark and endless, seemed to study her with quiet amusement. "You look unsettled," he said softly, almost teasingly. "Tell me, Lyra, does fear visit you often?" Lyra straightened.
"I do not fear the usual things, Your Majesty."
"Only the unknown." Baylor stepped closer, the shadows in the hall bending around him. "Ah, the unknown," he said. "It is where all power lies, and it is where you will find the truth of yourself." She frowned. "Truth of myself? Your absence has taught you fragility," he said, voice low, deliberate. "Yet I see strength beneath it. Strength most do not know they carry."
Lyra's cheeks warmed. She had never been praised for strength, only pitied for what she lacked.
Yet here, in the presence of a man, or perhaps something more, she felt as if she had been acknowledged for who she truly was, not for what she could not give. Before she could not give, before she could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the hall outside. Servants rushed in, panic in their eyes. "Your Majesty, the Shadow Beast. It has returned. Stronger this time, and it moves toward the eastern walls." Baylor's expression hardened. His usual composure remained, but there was an edge in his eyes, a flash of something primal. "Then we will meet it," he said, and without another word he swept toward the balcony overlooking the castle grounds. Lyra followed, her pulse quickening. Below, the courtyard was a mass of fog and darkness. The shadow beast moved with terrifying grace, its glowing eyes scanning the walls. Villagers had fled in the night, and now it seemed to test the defenses of the castle itself. Valor's hand brushed her shoulder lightly. "Do not fear," he said. "Even the darkness respects what it cannot touch. Watch and learn." From the balcony, Lyra saw him move as if he were part of the shadows themselves. His presence was commanding, almost magnetic, and the air seemed to respond to him. Without lifting a sword, he gestured toward the beast, and it hesitated, its massive form frozen in place. Lyra's breath caught. There was power here, ancient and terrible, but also controlled, tempered by a mind that had endured centuries. After the creature retreated into the mists, Baylor turned to her. "You see, courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the ability to face it." Lyra nodded, though her heart still raced. There was a lesson here. She could feel it, one she would not fully understand until later. For the next day she remained in the castle, working closely with Valor. They began to study the curse spreading across Ilarion, a dark force that drained life from the land, leaving villages withered and frightened. Valor taught her to perceive the unseen, the lingering spirits, the subtle pulse of magic in the stones, the quiet whispers of the trees. Lyra discovered she had an intuition she had never realized, a sensitivity to the shadow and light around her. Yet with every lesson, every shared moment, the bond between them deepened. Valor was patient but insistent, guiding her through fear and wonder alike. He tested her limits, pushing her to see what she could endure and what she could conquer. And all the while his gaze lingered on her, unreadable, making her pulse quicken and her thoughts spin in ways she could not fully control. One evening, as a blood-red sun dipped behind the cliffs, Lyra found herself in the castle gardens. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the faint metallic tang of Valor's presence. She did not notice him approach until he was standing beside her. "You have grown stronger," he said quietly. "Not in body but in spirit. And yet there is still fear here," he added, placing a pale hand over her chest, lightly, not pressing, but making her aware of the space between them. Lyra swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "I am learning." He tilted his head, as if considering her. "Learning is not enough. You must trust, Lyra. Trust in yourself and in me." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world fell away. The shadows of the garden seemed to close around them, yet they were not frightening. They were intimate, protective, almost alive with anticipation. Before she could respond, a loud knock echoed from the castle gates. A messenger arrived, bowing low. "Your Majesty, there is news from the northern village. A plague of shadows is spreading. Lives are in danger. They beg for your aid." Vaylor's eyes narrowed. "Then we leave at once." He turned to Lyra. "You will come. You must see with your own eyes. You cannot truly understand until you witness the depth of despair and the strength required to overcome it." Lyra hesitated. Traveling into the cursed lands was dangerous. The shadow beast might still roam, and the curse could strike at any moment. Yet something in Vaylor's eyes, something commanding and yet vulnerable, made her nod. She would follow him. The journey to the northern village was long and treacherous. The land seemed to twist under the weight of the curse. Trees bent unnaturally, and fog clung to the ground like a living thing. Villages lay empty, doors swinging in the wind, fields barren and gray. Lyra's heart ached at the sight. The curse was worse than she had imagined, leaving a tangible despair in its wake. Vaylor guided her with calm authority, yet his eyes were sharp, noting every danger, every sign of magic or life force being drained. "Do not be afraid to step forward," he said. "The shadows respect courage more than fear. Step forward, and they will pause." At the edge of the village, Lyra saw them, families huddled together, shadows crawling over their homes like smoke. The villagers looked up as they arrived, hope sparking in their eyes at the sight of the Vampire King. Vaylor's presence alone drove back some of the creeping darkness, but the work was far from over. Together he and Lyra moved among the villagers, helping to protect them, to strengthen their defenses, and to understand the source of the curse. Lyra realized that the creatures feeding on the village were not mindless. They were drawn to despair, to grief, to the quiet suffering of those who had lost hope.
"You see," Vaylor said quietly as they worked, "despair is more dangerous than any blade."
"And yet, hope is stronger than darkness if one knows how to wield it." Lyra nodded, understanding the truth of his words. She felt a strange connection to him in that moment, as if they were two halves of a whole, one who had lived centuries and one who had carried a quiet grief for too long. As night fell, they returned to the castle, weary but victorious. Lyra's hands trembled from exhaustion, yet her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Vaylor watched her carefully, his expression softening in a way he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You have done well," he said, "but there is more to learn, more to see, and more to feel." Lyra's cheeks warmed. She wanted to ask what he meant, but a sudden movement at the window caught her attention. A shadow flickered, almost human, almost animal, and then vanished before she could focus. Vaylor followed her gaze. "It watches," he said simply. "The darkness is never idle. It tests, it waits, it learns. And now, it has learned you are not to be taken lightly." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had faced shadow beasts and curses today, yet nothing had unsettled her as much as the thought that this darkness now knew her, that it had sensed her courage, her presence, her vulnerability. Vaylor stepped closer, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Do not fear it," he whispered. "You are stronger than you realize, and soon you will see just how much power lies within you, and within the bond we share." Lyra swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She wanted to trust him, to believe him, yet fear still lingered at the edges of her mind. What did he mean by bond, and what would it demand of her? As she lay down that night, the castle silent around her, she could not shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely a noblewoman haunted by her own loss. She was part of something larger, something dangerous and beautiful. A world of shadows, of power, of a man who could see her soul and still smile. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the walls of her room, she knew the shadow beast had not forgotten them. It was coming. The castle of Ilarion lay quiet under a sky veiled in clouds, the faint silver glow of the moon barely illuminating the spires. But within its walls, silence was deceptive. Shadows clung to the corners, restless, as if aware of Lyra's presence. She moved through the halls with cautious steps, her mind heavy with the events of the past days. The shadow beast, the curse, and Valor's constant, watchful gaze. Lyra had begun to understand that the Vampire King was more than a ruler of fear. He was a being shaped by centuries, by loss and solitude, by battles that no mortal could remember. And yet he had chosen to allow her into his life, into his world of darkness. That in itself was a weighty honor, and a terrifying responsibility. She found Valor in the inner courtyard, standing beneath an ancient oak whose leaves seemed black in the night. The wind moved them with a whispering rustle, like secrets shared only with those willing to listen. "You came early," Lyra said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought I might find you here." Valor's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained solemn. "Some lessons cannot wait," he said. "And some truths cannot remain hidden forever." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. She had begun to realize that Valor's lessons were not only about survival or courage, they were about understanding herself and the shadows within her heart. He gestured for her to follow, and they walked together into the castle's deeper chambers, rooms that most courtiers did not even know existed. The walls were lined with ancient books and artifacts, each holding stories of kings and queens long gone, of battles fought and powers claimed. Lyra ran her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the weight of history in her hands. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "And terrifying." Valor nodded. "It is the same with life," he said. "Beauty and terror often walk together. The heart that fears neither is the heart that endures." Lyra turned to him, sensing a depth to his words she did not yet fully understand. "And yet I feel so small, so fragile." He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. "Fragility does not mean weakness," he said. "It is the recognition of limits and the courage to move beyond them. You have faced shadows that would terrify the bravest of mortals, and yet you stand. That is strength." Lyra's heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to let his words sink into the corners of her soul that had been empty for so long. Yet fear lingered, like a shadow at the edge of her mind. Before she could speak, a sudden disturbance in the courtyard caught her attention. Valor's eyes narrowed, and he moved with fluid precision, leading her to the balcony overlooking the garden. The shadow beast had returned. Its massive form moved like liquid darkness, slithering through the fog, eyes glowing with an intensity that made Lyra's blood run cold. But this time, Valor did not act alone. He held out his hand, and the shadows in the courtyard seemed to respond, coiling around the creature, restraining it without harming it. Lyra gasped. She had never seen power like this. Not in books, not in tales, not in the whispers of the villagers. It was both beautiful and terrifying. "Why do you not destroy it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Valor's eyes met hers. "Destruction is not always the answer," he said.
Understanding is, every shadow has a reason for existing.
"Even darkness can teach." Lyra considered his words, feeling a strange resonance deep within her. Perhaps she too had been a shadow, moving through life unseen, misunderstood, carrying grief that no one could fully comprehend. And yet here she was, learning to face it, to understand it, and perhaps to transform it. As the creature slunk away, subdued but unharmed, Lyra felt Valor's hand brush hers. A small, almost imperceptible touch, yet it sent warmth through her chest. She looked at him, searching for meaning in the endless darkness of his eyes. "You are changing," he said quietly. "And I am beginning to hope." Hope. The word struck her like a lightning bolt. She had not allowed herself to feel it in years, not since she had discovered her inability to bear children, not since her family's disappointment had weighed on her like a stone. And yet here it was, fragile and luminous, born from the bond she shared with this ancient, enigmatic being. That night, as the castle slept and shadows stretched long across the halls, Valor spoke to her in a way he had never spoken before. They were seated in the library, the glow of a single candle casting flickering light across the shelves. "There is something you must know about me," he said, his voice low and steady. "Centuries ago, I was not always this. I loved and I lost. I watched those I cherished wither in time while I remained unchanged. It is a curse, yes, but also a lesson. Immortality without connection is emptiness. I have endured it for centuries, and yet I have never lost the longing. Lyra listened, her heart aching at the weight of his confession. You've suffered, she said softly. Vaylor's eyes met hers, dark and unflinching.
Yes.
And that suffering shaped me. But it also taught me the value of trust, of courage, of love that endures beyond fear. That is why I brought you here. Not because you are complete or perfect, but because you carry strength where you believe there is none. Lyra's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him that his words meant more than she could ever express. And yet, the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached out, allowing herself to place her hand lightly against his. He did not recoil. He did not demand. He simply held her hand, his touch a silent acknowledgement of the bond growing between them. For several nights they continued to face the shadows together, traveling to cursed villages, confronting creatures that fed on despair, and guiding the frightened villagers toward hope. Lyra discovered within herself a courage she had never known, a power that seemed to awaken only in the presence of Vaylor. And Vaylor, for his part, seemed to soften, his centuries of solitude easing just enough to allow trust to grow where suspicion had always lived. One evening, as they rested beneath the stars, Lyra spoke the words she had kept locked away for so long. I am afraid, she admitted, of the curse, of the shadows, of myself. And yet, I feel drawn to you in ways I do not understand. Vaylor's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability flickering across his features. Lyra, he said, the heart does not always follow reason. You cannot control it, nor should you try. It is not weakness to feel, it is strength. To allow oneself to hope, to trust, to love, that is courage. She looked at him, her chest tight with a mixture of fear, longing, and something else she could not name. But you are immortal. I am mortal. How can such a bond exist? Vaylor reached out, gently lifting her chin so that her eyes met his. Mortality and immortality are only words, he said softly. The bond is not defined by time, but by trust, by courage, by the willingness to face darkness together. That is what endures. A silence fell between them, heavy and electric. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of night-blooming flowers, the scent of life that dared to grow even in shadow. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile light that seemed to come from both herself and Vaylor. But just as she began to believe that the darkness might not be so terrifying after all, a sudden disturbance shattered the quiet. A violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and a distant echoing roar reached their ears. Lyra's pulse quickened. "The shadow beast," she whispered. Vaylor's eyes darkened, a flash of steel in their depth. "It has found us again," he said. "And this time, it does not come alone." Lyra felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She had faced shadows before, creatures of despair and darkness. Yet the presence of Vaylor gave her courage. Still, this felt different. Something larger, older, and more dangerous than anything they had encountered before was approaching. Vaylor's hand found hers again, his grip firm and reassuring. "Do not fear," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Whatever comes, we face it together. You will see. The heart is stronger than the shadows when it beats with courage." Lyra nodded, gripping his hand tightly. The night pressed in around them, filled with whispers of darkness and the promise of trials yet to come. And in that moment she realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely a visitor in this castle of shadows. She was part of something larger, something dangerous and beautiful, a bond that neither time nor curse could easily undo. The castle of Valerian stood silent beneath a moonless sky. Shadows stretched long and deep across the towers, moving as though alive. Lyra stood at the highest balcony, her cloak fluttering in the cold wind, and stared into the forest below. The shadow beast, now enormous and more terrifying than she had imagined, prowled among twisted trees, its eyes glowing like embers. Beside her, Valor's presence was steady, his calm certainty a shield against the fear that gripped her. "Are we ready?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Valor's dark eyes met hers, sharp and unwavering. "We are always ready, Lyra." Fear is the mind's shadow. Courage is the heart's light. Remember that. She nodded. For days, she had trained, learned, and faced horrors she had never imagined. The bond between them had grown, forged in trials, courage, and unspoken understanding. Yet this moment was different. This was the culmination, the test that would decide not only the fate of the kingdom, but the strength of the connection they shared. They descended to the courtyard, the air thick with tension. The shadow beast emerged from the mist, its form larger than the castle gate, and behind it, several smaller creatures, born of darkness and despair. The ground seemed to tremble under their presence. Valor placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Remember what I taught you. See the truth in the shadows. They are not mindless. They feed on despair. Do not let them feed on yours." Lyra drew a deep breath and stepped forward. For the first time, she did not look away. She saw the shadows not as monsters, but as manifestations of fear, loneliness, and hopelessness. She felt their weight, and instead of shrinking from it, she let the courage she had cultivated rise. Valor moved beside her, their hands brushing once, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Together they advanced, their steps sure despite the trembling earth beneath them. Lyra felt a pulse of energy pass through her, as if the castle, the wind, and even the creatures themselves recognized the bond they shared. The shadow beast roared, a sound that shook the walls of the castle, and lunged toward them. Lyra felt the instinct to flee, but Valor's calm hand held her in place. "Focus," he whispered. "See it as it is." Closing her eyes for a moment, Lyra reached into the courage within her heart. She imagined the shadow beast as nothing more than a creature shaped by grief, and she extended her thoughts, a gentle light emanating from her, touching the darkness. To her amazement, the shadow hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering. Valor placed his hand on hers, guiding her. Together their combined presence, mortal courage and immortal power, reached into the shadows. Slowly the smaller creatures dissolved, returning to mist, leaving only the massive beast in the center. Lyra opened her eyes and saw that it was trembling, confused, and in pain. She stepped closer, her voice calm, steady. "You do not need to harm us," she said. "There is no reason for fear. Go back to the shadows where you belong." For a moment, the beast seemed to consider her words. Its glowing eyes softened, the embers dimming, and then it bowed its head slightly before retreating into the forest. Lyra felt a wave of relief and awe wash over her. She had faced the darkness and not been consumed. She had transformed it. Valor's hand found hers again, this time with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "You did it," he said quietly. "You see what many cannot see. You have courage, compassion, and strength. You are not defined by what you lack." Lyra felt tears sting her eyes. I never thought I could do this. I always thought I was broken." Valor's gaze softened. "You are not broken. You are more than most dare to become. The heart that survives despair and still chooses hope, that heart is rare. That heart is yours." The victory over the shadows was more than a battle, it was a transformation. Lyra felt her fears, her past grief, and her self-doubt dissolve into a quiet, glowing strength. She realized that her inability to bear children did not diminish her. She had become a force of life, courage, and love, a beacon even in the darkest of nights. As they returned to the castle, the villagers began to emerge from hiding. Their eyes, filled with awe and gratitude, followed Valor and Lyra. The curse that had gripped the northern lands was lifting, not through violence alone, but through understanding, courage, and the strength of the bond between mortal and immortal. That evening, Lyra found herself in the castle's great hall. the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the stone walls. Valor approached, carrying a small, ornate box that glimmered faintly in the firelight. "This is for you," he said, placing it before her. Lyra opened the box carefully. Inside, she found a delicate vial containing crimson liquid, Valor's blood, enchanted and potent, a symbol of trust and union. "You've grown stronger," Valor said softly, "but there is one final step. This is not a test of courage, but of choice. You may take it and share in a bond that transcends mortality, or you may remain as you are. The choice is yours." Lyra held the vial, feeling its warmth and weight. She thought of the days spent facing shadows, of the courage she had found within herself, and of the trust that had grown between her and Valor. She knew that to accept it was to embrace change, to step fully into a world of both shadow and light. Her hand trembled slightly, but she made her choice. She took the vial, lifting it to her lips. As the enchanted blood touched her, a warmth spread through her entire being, a deep glowing light that seemed to awaken every hidden corner of her soul. Valor watched silently, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief, awe, and something softer, hope. As the bond took hold, Lyra felt a surge of energy, not just in herself, but around them. The castle seemed brighter, the shadows softer, the night less fearful. She had embraced transformation, and in doing so she had begun to create new life, not in the way the world expected, but in the way that truly mattered, a life of courage, love, and unity. Valor stepped closer, his hand brushing hers.
"You are remarkable," he said, his voice low and full of reverence.
"You have faced despair and emerged stronger. And now, death. We move forward together." Lyra felt tears slick down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming sense of belonging. She realized that her past grief, her fears, and even her loss had led her here, to this moment, to this bond, to this shared future with a being who saw her not for what she lacked, but for who she truly was. Days turned into weeks, and the kingdom of Elarian began to heal. The curse faded, leaving behind green fields, vibrant villages, and hope that had once seemed impossible. Lyra and Valor moved through the kingdom together, their presence a reminder that courage, trust, and compassion could overcome even the darkest of shadows. And in the quiet moments when the moon hung low over the castle, Lyra would look at Valor and feel the depth of their connection. It was more than affection, more than loyalty. It was understanding, acceptance, and the kind of love that transcended time itself. One night, standing on the balcony where they had first faced the shadow beast together, Lyra spoke softly. "I never thought I could belong here. I never thought I could find hope." Valor's dark eyes held hers, a gentle smile on his lips. "No one truly belongs," he said, "until they choose to. And you, Lyra, have chosen." The wind stirred the castle towers, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming flowers and the promise of life renewed. The shadows still lingered, as they always would, but they no longer held fear. They were witnesses to courage, companions to love, and reminders that even in darkness, light could endure. Lyra placed her hand in Valor's, feeling the warmth, the strength, the bond that had been forged in trials, trust, and shared hope. The Vampire King, once a figure of fear and isolation, had become her companion, her protector, and her equal. Together they had faced despair and transformed it into courage, darkness into understanding, fear into love. And as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, Lyra and Valor stood side by side, not as ruler and subject, not as mortal and immortal, but as partners in a world where shadows and light danced together in eternal balance. The castle, the kingdom, and the hearts of its people had been changed forever. And in the quiet of the morning, with the wind whispering through the towers, Lyra smiled, knowing that for the first time in her life, she was truly whole.